This video is a Christian view of the controversial subject of gender identity.
Welcome, everybody, to this latest episode of Testable Faith. My name is Rana. I'm a biochemist and a Christian apologist, and I'm joined in studio today by Dr. Steve Willing and Dr. Christina Cirucci. And today we're going to be taking on the question of what is rapid onset gender dysphoria, and why should you, if you're a parent or a grandparent, care about this issue? Chris, welcome.
Thank you for having me. It's great to be here.
Steve?
Hi, Fuzz. Thanks for having me back.
Yeah, well, I appreciate very much both of you being here in studio with us to talk about this whole issue of gender dysphoria. And my understanding is that traditionally there have been two categories that for people that had gender dysphoria. So what are those two categories, and what's characteristic about them?
So historically, gender dysphoria was very rare, and it was in two kind of distinct populations. One was very young children, usually 3 to 4 years old, usually boys, that exhibited gender atypical behavior, maybe of the opposite sex. And what they found was with time, those boys became comfortable with their birth sex. And then historically, the second population was older men who want to become women. We think of Rachel Levine or Bruce, Caitlyn Jenner. So that's, for many, many years, gender dysphoria was rare, and it was typically in those two populations. And now recently we've seen this new population of young, usually girls, adolescents, emerge. Yeah. And that's what we call rapid onset gender dysphoria.
Yeah. So, Steve, what's your perspective on this?
Yeah. As Chris says, this was considered rare. The term appeared around 2018. It came with a paper from Lisa Littman that was published at PLOS, I think, Public Library of Science. And she had been a researcher, a pediatrician, developmental type doctor, and she became aware of these parent groups, on the internet who were reporting this phenomenon of that there are children who were completely unremarkable in growing up, very happy, well-adjusted children who suddenly around age 12, 13, 14, suddenly became gender dysphoric and started pushing for transitioning. So she wrote this up, this phenomenon. She was the one that came up with the term rapid onset gender dysphoria. The rapid onset term differentiates it from those ones who were clearly dysphoric back when they were 3, 4, 5 years old. That's where the rapid onset factor comes in. Needless to say, this has been highly controversial. It's been challenged. Some challenged her paper on the data. The paper was retracted. Some revisions were requested. She made the revisions. It was republished with its conclusions largely intact, much to the chagrin of some of her critics. Then subsequently, Abigail Schreier wrote a book, Irreversible Damage. It's not a scientific study. It's a book. So she researched. She talked to parents. She talked to children. She talked to influencers. She talked to multiple representatives on different sides of the question and came up with the book Irreversible Damage. It clearly has been controversial, but it seems to hold true. It rings true because it dovetails with another phenomenon that psychologists like Jean Twenge and Jonathan Haidt were seeing, that beginning around 2012, when smartphones became widely available, over 50% of kids have them, there was this rapid rise across the board in a variety of mental illnesses. And this seems to be arising at the same time and paralleling this rise in the mental illness among the young population. Now, Jonathan Haidt, in his book this year, The Anxious Generation, even references this gender dysphoria and this being a possible adverse consequence of smartphones.
Yeah. So, Chris, what characterizes rapid onset gender dysphoria? Who is the group that tends to display this gender dysphoria?
Right. The typical, we're talking adolescents, puberty, prepubertal children or adolescents, teenagers who have no history of, as Steve said, gender dysphoria or struggles. And then out of the blue, they come to their parents and I'm transgender. And what we see here is it's the majority of these are females, are girls. And in Abigail Schreier's book, she compared it to anorexia in girls. There's some correlates there, but yeah, it can be very difficult for a parent because their child maybe seemed to be doing well with no struggles related to gender, and then out of the blue. And in Lisa Littman's research, she found these kids they were often on social media, smartphones. They may have had friends that were transgender, and we see this. I think, if you look at data from clinics, from referrals, it's just skyrocketed lately, and it's mostly in adolescent girls.
Yes, prior to about 2010, it was extraordinarily rare, less than 0.01%. So it would be remarkable to have two children with gender dysphoria in the same school, much less even the same class. But this was happening where not one, not two, but 3, 4 kids in the same high school or junior high, middle school class were having gender dysphoria. This was totally unexpected and totally unprecedented.
So then this appears to be something that's driven really as a sociological phenomena then.
Well, that seems to be a compelling hypothesis, that it's a social contagion or an availability cascade where a belief becomes widely popular because everybody else is believing it, or case of imitative behavior. I mean, children learn by imitating. Children learn by imitating their parents, by imitating other adults, by imitating one another. And so this is sort of a natural human tendency, and it's how God designed us, that we learn and grow by imitating, but that can go awry.
Chris, any thoughts?
Yes, I would agree with what Steve's saying, and it's there. Well, like I said, often these kids will have a peer that identifies as transgender, and yeah, it's a very difficult situation for parents and kids. And
now, it seems to me that, given that this appears to be a relatively recent phenomena, that it correlates with the high use of social media. If you're a parent or a grandparent and you have a child now or a grandchild that announces that they think they're of a different gender, right, of the opposite gender, and they want to go through some kind of transitioning or gender-affirming care, it seems to me that this is something that parents should be aware of the phenomena, and B, really hesitant or resistant to allowing kids to go down that path. What are your thoughts?
Absolutely, and unfortunately, I think parents we hear the story, well, do you want a dead daughter or a live son? And they're kind of threatened with this idea that their child would commit suicide if they don't do this. And what an awful thing for a parent to have to face. And sadly, many of these kids do have mental health disorders, and they are at risk for suicide anyway, but we know that transition doesn't improve that. Yeah. And so I would encourage the parents to get their kids help, but not to go quickly down that path of transition.
Again, take away the smartphones, take away the tablets, restrict the computer access, get them off social media. There are many good reasons for taking those actions, and the gender dysphoria is just the beginning of the reasons for that, not the end of the reasons. Yeah. In a previous recording, we talked about Jonathan Haidt, the anxious generation, and the recognition that social media and smartphones are wreaking havoc on the mental health of a young generation.
Yeah. So, what would you say as Christians to somebody who falls into the category of having rapid onset gender dysphoria?
What would I say to the child or to the parents?
Both. Yeah.
Well, what I would say to the parents is what I've already said about restricting the access to social media, but I would I have to say, proceed with caution, proceed with humility. And humility means more than just submitting to whatever the doctors may happen to say. Humility also means not being too dogmatically certain which path you're going to take, one way or the other. Humility is slow to rush into a decision process because you realize the limits of your own cognition, your limits of your own ability to analyze. If there are Christian parents, Christian students, the Christian Medical and Dental Association has many resources on this to which I would point them. But I think much of this comes down to identity. It's dehumanizing to reduce anyone's identity to their sexuality. We're so much more than that.
Yeah. Chris?
Yes, I would encourage both the young person and the parent that this isn't a quick fix, and you need to take the long road. It's going to be a long haul, and get yourself informed. I highly encourage any parent dealing with this to read Abigail Schreier's book, Irreversible Damage. It's not a Christian book, but a lot of very insightful information in there. And then Miriam Grossman's book, Lost in Translation, has a lot of resources in the back for parents. And again, inform yourselves and don't go quickly down that path. Get your kids off the smartphone. Sometimes parents have to take their kids, move somewhere else and get them out of their environment and get to the root of whatever else is going on.
Yeah.
Chris raises a really important point when she points out that Abigail Schreier is not a Christian, because this skepticism, this concern, or this caution about gender transitioning, it's not merely a phenomenon of white, conservative, Republican, fundamentalist Christians. This skepticism is coming from many quarters along the political spectrum, along the ideological spectrum, along the religious spectrum. It's not just a cult phenomenon.
Yeah. Thank you so much for watching this episode of Testable Faith. If you want to know more about issues related to gender identity, check out the links in the show description. Until next time, God bless you.